Okay.
Okay, great. Let's begin the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting of December 5th, 6:03 p.m. Let's start off with any announcements we may have. I know Sue has at least one.
Yeah. I wanted to let you know that we did not get a municipal planning grant application in. We just didn't have the time to pull it together and go through the town's process of getting it before the select board. And I did have some concerns about the amount of funding that I could put towards it to make it kind of a complete project, and kind of replicating some of what the state may or may not be doing. So that didn't get put in. We did get notification of the Better Connections grant today. That's got an end of January letter of interest that's required. So I think at the January meeting, I'll bring a kind of a proposal to you to get planning commission sign off, and then we can get it to the select board if we decide to pursue that. In the meantime, you know, a couple of other grants that our department is involved with have come across our table. One, you know, potentially one for Tri-Park that we'll be the applicants on. So, you know, there's a lot of money out there and the capacity is kind of strained. We're trying to put it where kind of the most immediate need is.
If I know when we spoke on the phone, maybe you added something else about the kind of rationale for not applying for it, which maybe either you said now and I blanked out, or you didn't say it, just about how the state's doing similar efforts that we just learned of. Did you say that?
Yeah. So, Sarah, thanks for sending the RFQ along. The state is they're hiring a consultant, I think, for like 2 years of work, kind of an accessory dwelling unit, kind of guidebook or kit. And then it seemed to be in the RFQ some pre-permitted designs as well. So I think they're going to be doing some of that work.
So to some degree, not entirely, it's kind of like a, what's the word? It feels better that we didn't, we can get the grant in, because it's to some degree overlapping with what the state's just starting to work on.
Yeah. Yep. My only other announcement is we held the second walk bike plan public meeting last week. I thought it was pretty well attended, primarily by walk and bicycle advocates. There was somebody that was speaking to the need for pedestrian infrastructure north of the roundabout, given Great River Terrace and the hotel program from the state. So I thought it was a good meeting. We're hoping to have a draft report in the coming weeks to be able to take it to the select board in January. So there'll just be more coming on that. Okay. Those are my announcements.
Any other announcements from anyone? Seeing none. Okay, let's do the minutes. Entertain a motion and a second before any discussion on whether to. Yep, Prudence, unmute, please.
I move approval of the minutes.
Is there a second? Oh, you weren't here. That's right.
Sarah raised
raised her hand. Okay. Any edits, questions, comments? Anything else? No. Okay.
You can stop that. Business instructions say yes. Let's approve them. In the room.
You can vote. You can vote aye, even if you're here.
I think so. If not, we don't have a quorum, so we can wait till the next meeting.
Oh, I see. It kind of, you know, I don't think I've ever seen an absolute requirement to approve minutes. It's just good policy.
I have also heard that, Tom.
Yeah. So
I have heard that.
But everyone does it. It's just good policy to review and to make sure we're all kind of on the same page what happens. Maybe you watch the recording and you can approve the minutes based off that. Or maybe don't. Regardless, here we go. All those in favor? Prudence, Sarah, Linda, and myself. Okay. Moving on to the bylaw modernization grant, our housing infill project. Once again, we have Brandy Saxton here of the firm PlaceSense to present and seek our guidance on some next elements of the project. Take it away.
Thank you. So I was going to start off tonight. We've kind of got two topics. We're going to talk about the neighborhood development area and the proposed boundaries of that. And then a bit of a walk back through the zoning amendments, just sort of checking in as to where we are. You have a memo. It has some discussion questions. I don't necessarily think we're going to answer every single question tonight, but I figured that this would help structure both this meeting and probably the next one as well, as we try to wrap up and finalize the package of amendments. So I'm going to start with the mapping. Sue, I don't know how your room is set up. Should I put it up on the screen?
Yeah, you can put it up, or if you, yeah.
Yep.
Or I can do
Okay.
it, but yeah.
I think I've got it here.
Do you guys want me to straighten this out?
It doesn't bother me. Oh, okay. It's fine.
Okay, so you should have seen this map, I think, in your package. I'm trying to maximize it here on the screen. I think you're familiar with the neighborhood development area program. Obviously, Brattleboro already has a designated neighborhood development area around the downtown. And so this map is one of the maps that would go in the package for a new and extended NDA, a new area around West Brattleboro, and extension of the downtown NDA. So what we see on the map, just to get people oriented, in red, we see the designated downtown boundary, and then a dashed line that's buffered out around that half a mile. And this is the defined neighborhood planning area that comes from statute. And so those lands are eligible to be in the NDA, and you can extend the NDA beyond a half mile from your downtown if you justify why. You've got some good reasons. A good chunk of your neighborhood planning area happens to be in New Hampshire. You've got the whetstone coming through, and you can't have the land in the flood and river corridor area in. And you've also got some institutional uses, the hospital and the high school, in those areas too. So we have looked at the map. Obviously, you know that the goal is to try to get the Winston Prouty campus in. You can see that shown now in bright yellow. So the area that's in pale yellow is the area that you've currently got designated as an NDA. That boundary was a little funky around the edges, so we've gone on. So you see some like small adjustments around the edges, and that's really just to bring the boundary to property lines where we can, and then up to the flood and river corridor where that boundary cuts off. And we got rid of some weird little slivers that were created by cutting out that corridor area. And then in other cases, there were slivers that were cut off in the current one that we've added back in. So there's little tiny adjustments, but the main adjustment is to get the Winston Prouty campus in, to get the neighborhoods that wrap around the high school in down here, and to get the neighborhoods along Western Ave on either side of exit 2 into the neighborhood development area. Being in the neighborhood development area creates some opportunities for primarily regulatory relief, state permitting relief for priority housing projects within that area. That's the main benefit. There's some benefits to the municipality as well in terms of competitiveness of grant applications and some competitiveness in funding sources and things like that. But the big benefit and the reason for doing this is to facilitate housing creation and help projects that would otherwise need to go through Act 250 get out of having to do that and just be subject to local regulation in the NDA. So that's the downtown one. Does anyone have any questions about those boundaries or comments they want to make about the downtown area extension?
Randy, I do.
Mhm.
Have you found, or do you know if it's common in Vermont? Well, I don't know if neighborhood development area exists anywhere else, but anyway, that's not my question. But if in Vermont, it's pretty common for, municipalities to justify expanding their NDA, twice half-mile distance.
So there are about somewhere in the range of 8 to 10 designated NDAs at this point. I haven't checked quite recently. I know it was 7 and there's been a few more, so I'm not quite sure how many at this point, but I think something 8 to 10. I think almost all of them include some land that is outside the immediate buffer, half-mile buffer. It's not very common in Vermont to sort of have a node like that you could just extend straight out from. We often have a pretty linear development pattern, often because of terrain and rivers. So, that you might go further in one direction or another is not uncommon. And a couple of the NDAs have come in. I think South Burlington has done more than one extension over the years. So that actually is something that a couple of communities have done, is come for an extension. So that is not unheard of.
Okay. Yeah, I just bring that up because I think I brought up at a couple other meetings my kind of hesitation to, it's my understanding this program is supposed, is primarily based upon reinforcing smart growth principles. And so they have that half mile around downtown. And to me, that seems like a pretty good distance, right? It just takes like 10 minutes to walk, but a whole mile might take 20 minutes. That seems pushing it for people not to get in their cars. But if we're to view this program as like, hey, another way that we can wiggle things around to get more support for our property owners and housing projects, then we can view it that way too. But to me, it doesn't seem like, designating 100 acres of forest for, a compact development goal, which is smart growth, is in line with that. But so I'm not sure where I stand on that right now, but we're in a housing crisis,
So one of the questions that is further on in the list of things is, do you want to rezone the entire 185 acres to the mixed use of the Winston Prouty campus to the mixed use district? One could also have the same question around, do you want to bring the entire property into the NDA, or do you want to only go sort of partway up the hill? You could draw the line. This is obviously the full boundary, and I don't know, Sue, if you had any conversations when you talked to Jake at DHCD about that and what their perceptions were.
He didn't have, the one comment he made about the Winston Prouty campus was, are there natural constraints on the property, steep slopes, that kind of thing. So that would be a barrier to having the whole property. And we've had lots of conversations with the state about this property and how to kind of assist with the redevelopment of it, particularly the infill redevelopment. And
this is my kind of take on state politics, right? The NDA and smart growth principles were written by the legislature, and the department is run by the Republican governor.
I think
so
that these
programs
programs,
the program to its intent, legislative intent, which can be interpreted.
I don't know. I think that these guidelines were written under a previous administration.
And they're actually implemented
at the time.
Yeah, I would say, Sue, they're actually not implemented so much by just the individual department, the DHCD. They're implemented by the downtown board, which includes reps from all the agencies and appointees representing various interest groups throughout the state. So there's a pretty, I would say, having been engaged with the downtown board over, since the mid 2000, like 2005-ish, governors have come and gone. The position of the downtown board hasn't changed very much.
Yeah. I was going to say, even when I'm talking with state staff, they don't actually have a lot of, it's case by case. So, I think you could look at the Winston Prouty. I mean, Brandy brought up a steep slope map, and you
Yeah,
could
so you could see that.
make an argument for like the infill portion of the existing campus and maybe not wanting the rest in.
And then
So-
another, yeah,
So
another,
yeah, from us. Oh,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
because I was going to kind of move to something different.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can show you the slopes. I can show you the forest block map as well. So the other issue that may get raised about the Winston Prouty campus is that there is a forest block that does come in there. So I would say from a steep slope perspective, there are steep slopes. Obviously, you can see the darker brown areas. Those are the steep slopes. So there's a I'm like pointing at my screen, which is always very helpful. So basically, right under where it says Winston and Prouty, right in here, this is a hill. But you could certainly get in here and get to there's fairly flat land up and higher. So there's a couple of zones of land that are at different elevation points on this property. So you could get to land that is developable. You know, and obviously they're not necessarily looking at it right now, but the whole area in here, that's much of the area that's cleared, is sloped, yes, but not severely sloped. So that shouldn't be the barrier there. And then let me see, I think I have the forest one. Is it this one? Yes. So there is a forest block that comes in, which is this green area. And so you can see basically the excluded area is the area around the immediate buildings. It's essentially the open land, the cleared land on the property. This is not a very highly valued block. So the blocks get scored on a 0 to 10 scale, and it's a 4 on that, with 10 being the high score, the most significant and highest quality blocks. So you can see, similar blocks surround most of downtown Brattleboro. So that's those pieces there. Let me go back to the end. So certainly one of the things that could be considered would be to not put the entire 185 acres in and only keep the portion closer into the road in. But we would need some direction about that in terms of where you want to draw that line.
Randy, I had a question about boundaries too. We basically have here the darker red line designating the downtown, the lighter yellow indicating what's currently considered within the NDA, and then the dashed bubble indicating the half-mile radius outside of that. I'm curious in terms of extending, would that be an extension of the downtown area and the buffer beyond it, or is it just that we would extend the area around it?
So the extension would be all the land that's bright yellow. So this would all be, if approved, would then become part of the downtown Brattleboro NDA. And it does.
I just wanted to say, we call it the downtown Brattleboro NDA because you have to have a designated downtown or a designated village center to have an NDA around it. So that's why it would be part of the designated downtown.
Sure. So at that point, the dashed bubbles become a little bit less meaningful, but there is the downtown, there is the village center, and then to a certain extent, everything that is some version of yellow now is the area that we determine is most likely to be beneficial in developing at a higher infill density.
Yeah, so these are areas, they're zoned, they're serviced, you could build them. Obviously the Winston Prouty the zoning needs to change as well, the district. So that would be zoned for residential infill. The neighborhood development area program has criteria. A lot of those that you have to meet to have your zoning district be eligible for those lands being included. A big piece of it is the walkability part. So there needs to be sidewalks or sort of a plan for sidewalks, a requirement for sidewalks going forward. And, they're certainly willing to consider, and I think, for instance, this part of you got the NDA you've got comes south of the half-mile bubble, based on the idea that there really is another commercial walkable center down there. There's a grocery store, there's a pharmacy, there are the services that people would use and could walk to, the school. And so extending down into here gets you that. You can think that this extension from Winston Prouty comes down into there. And, on Western Avenue, there's some services, not as strong, but, a really strong connection back into downtown. And that's going to be improved through the bike ped improvement projects on Western Avenue as well. So that's basically the argument that the application will be making, is that it is a well-connected, walkable, bikeable area.
And the other thing about it is, when we were looking at areas, we were trying to find where there were actually developable parcels. So it's not just infill opportunity, because there's actually not a whole lot of that. But just to the west of the exit 2 interchange, there's a fairly large parcel there. So that's why it kind of goes on the other side of exit 2 to the west, trying to get that in along Maple Street. There's a parcel on the corner of Guilford and Maple Street that, could benefit from the reduced, if multifamily went in there, there can be a substantial reduction in not having to go to Act 250 or reduced wastewater fees. So.
Yeah, my next question was going to be just around centers, because it does seem, as you were saying, Brandy, that rather than necessarily considering, the area around exit 1 to be downtown, it is in many ways its own little village center there. And I'm curious if we just say so rather than saying it's downtown, because it's not.
I think you would probably have trouble getting a village center designation down there, based on. So this is that weirdness around the state's various designation programs and their interrelation to one another. So what the village center designation program is really about is historic preservation. And so exit 1 is not going to have the historic preservation component to it. Right. That will trigger being able to get a village center. You're actually in exactly the same circumstance as Middlebury is. I just did one of these projects for Middlebury last year, and they're just about to advance forward with their NDA. And, they've got Route 7 and essentially the same thing, right? They've got a core downtown, and then there's a commercial area that's, another half, 3/4 of a mile, from downtown, half mile, 3/4 of a mile down. And so, that is really another node, but, it doesn't get its own designation because, it's just where the Hannafords is, right?
So the program's not trying to enforce or promote sprawl either in the recent few decades, or?
No. So really what the effort has been is to, the NDA came out of, it's kind of a compromise outcome. There's been pressure to alleviate permitting requirements within designated growth areas locally, in existing settlements, designated growth areas. There was argument about how to define those at the state level. The NDA program is sort of the negotiated response that came out. And so it ties back to these downtown and village center designations and new town center designations. It provides that regulatory relief. And the legislature just in the last session further extended that regulatory relief to projects that would have otherwise needed Act 250 amendments. So it is the goal to try to provide that relief within designated these more targeted areas, so that I think in some ways it's the political compromise against the concern that housing should be more broadly exempted from Act 250. So there's that argument that's been definitely being made as well at the state level, that Act 250 itself is a barrier to housing.
Okay. Anything else for this NDA proposed map?
Yeah, so you can see the one, we didn't talk about the one in West Brattleboro. So this would be new. You don't have an NDA in West Brattleboro now. So you can see the village center, the planning area. This extends a little bit further along Route 9 to capture, as Sue mentioned before, land where infill development is possible.
And that buffer seems to be skewed a little bit too towards the riverside rather than up as far as we're proposing the NDA extend. But that again has to do with the village center. And that is a truly designated space because of the historic quality
Right.
of the area.
Right. And you run into a fair amount of floodplain there that runs along the whetstone. So that takes a big chunk out of some of that land there and, makes the fairly small extension up Route 9, I think, fairly easy to justify and defend in the application.
If I could, I think it would be helpful to weigh in on the Winston Prouty campus and see where people are feeling about it. So we can move forward, I guess, preparing the other parts of it. So it just would be helpful to know.
Mhm.
Tom's expressed how he feels.
Yeah. What do other commissioners feel, or questions to help you feel certainly? Sarah?
I think we should give Winston Prouty the opportunity to develop as much as or as little as they want. Tom, I hear you with the forest stuff, but I think that we really have limited areas to put up new housing and to limit this, sort of prime spot that has access to water and sewer because of, wanting to keep some forest, I think I would not support that. I also don't, and maybe this is, I know we had talked about bringing the Winston Prouty group in to talk about sort of what they've been thinking, but I imagine they're not thinking of, razing the entire property of the forest to put up, houses everywhere. So I imagine they'll be tasteful about it and, but I think limiting the amount that they can develop would not be a good move on our part.
Prudence, Lena?
I think it would be hard to figure out where to draw the line. I mean, it's some, and also just not seeing I haven't seen anything about what their plans are and so on. But it seems like they're going to, for the most part, want to develop, along the driveway, not far into the trails that lead to the Delta campus. So I don't, I think there's going to be a lot more that needs to, will more things come to us about that? I guess as we decide about changing the zoning, that'll.
Prudence, the last presentation I saw, they were talking about that they're thinking that a first phase would be that they would renovate the actual developed area for more housing.
Mhm.
Maybe remove a building, add another building, but generally kind of in that footprint that's there. But then they have future phases, if that works out to expand, and it's to go all along a kind of dirt road that connects to Delta campus right now with like pocket neighborhoods, if I can call it that.
Yep.
So it wouldn't be, one house on 1 acre and, 100 houses throughout that 100 acres. It wouldn't be just a homogeneous sprawl. So, I'll admit they're being, conscious or mindful there.
Will we see more specifics when we take up rezoning that parcel, or will?
They're working on a master plan right now with some architects and landscape architects. So I don't think we're going to see it before we take up rezoning. I think Tom had provided a link, to the select board materials. I think it was in May or April that they presented, and it really hasn't changed since then. I can put some materials in the Google Drive too, so that you can see it, but it's all very conceptual.
Yeah,
But Tom's correct. I mean, it's starting with infill on the existing developed campus. You know, that's the idea. And not using the soccer field, not using the nice field that, you know, I mean, might get cut into a little bit, but they want to preserve that as well.
And have they requested a zoning change? Is that something that they have asked?
Well, they would like the NDA designation, and in order to make that happen, there needs to be a zoning change then. So, and
So the zoning map, which can I pop? I think I can pop that one up, which this is not completely finished, but it's good enough for talking to. Right now, we've got that sitting in the mixed-use neighborhood. Certainly, you're going to want the developed part of the campus in the mixed-use neighborhood because that will take in the uses that are already there. As you know, it's zoned institutional right now, so we want to make sure that the things that the non-residential things that are actually happening on the campus are still allowed in the zoning district. So that makes the mixed use probably the most reasonable choice. So really, the question is whether you want the whole parcel in the same zoning district or you would want to split it somewhere. You know, and in that case, the somewhere, it could be just sort of drawing over the air photo sort of the footprint of the current campus and using that as a break line, or, you know, just picking a distance and drawing a straight line across somewhere, you know, like that. There's different ways to do that, or it could just all say in the mixed use because the residential is allowed there, and it does, you know, connect through to the industrial district there, you know, as well. So, you know, it's not exactly out of character to think that there could be non-residential uses further up the hill potentially. Okay.
Oh, Prudence's hand is up.
so I mean, given this discussion, I'm comfortable with including them in the neighborhood, designated neighborhood.
Okay, so anything else on the NDA, or shall we advance forward to the other topics in the memo?
Advance.
Advance. Okay. So if you've got the memo, I did try to link back to the prior notes and memos so that you could see that, and to the online map so you could start to explore that for the zoning district boundaries as well. So we've got the infill, which we talked about the last time, the infill housing overlay district language. We talked about height and I think building size a bit during the last meeting. So I wanted to give you the opportunity, if after that discussion more things have come to mind, or you have other questions or thoughts on that that you'd like to see addressed before you get a more complete final draft for review, this would be a good time to let me know.
Brandy, I wrote a note for myself, well, for you, about sections 2 and 3 in the memo, or just
Okay.
a couple thoughts to me looking through those and looking back at the linked documents you provided us before. Yeah, I kind of feel like, you know, we have some downtown neighborhoods where the properties are really close. You know, the developed buildings are really close to each other, and they're more close to the property lines than our current setbacks allow. And, you know, I feel like I don't really, not that I'm, you know, the planning department, but hear any complaints or issues with that. But yet our regs, keep having 10-foot or 15-foot setbacks from the line. I mean, right in my neighborhood, there's houses and buildings that are, I admit it's not the most convenient thing. They're 2 or 3 or 4 feet from each other. And sure, that can be a big pain, but how often does someone actually paint the side of their house? Especially if it's asbestos siding. Anywho,
Hopefully they're
and
painting the side of the house.
and there's pros. Yeah, hopefully they are, exactly. Oh, I just said that thinking of something that lasted longer, but yeah, it paint flakes off anything. So anyway, bad example. But yeah, it just seems like there's trade-offs. If we want density and infill, then it comes with trade-offs. And then it just comes down, I guess, down to, unless there's some national standard that absolutely needs to be followed, then it just comes down to personal preference and what us and the select board and the voters of the town are willing to, well, what they like or what they're willing to tolerate. And I just love to see some of these setbacks decrease. And also, just to wrap that up, and minimum lot size. Like, for example, on Pearl Street off Central between South Main, there's like a little carved out property from a bigger lot, and it's only 1,700 square feet. It's got a 3-story building, a house on it. And yeah, it looks a little funky, but I like funky personally. I wore the right sweater for.
They can't see you.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think lowering a lot of these setbacks, sure, it could lead to issues, but I think it's almost not going to, especially if we, have some level of review just to check for flagrant use of it.
So Tom, I know someone else wanted to speak as well, but a follow-up question to that, what you just said. So is that based on the current zoning, or is it based on the proposal for the reduced 3,600?
Yeah, the 3,600. Well, that's much bigger than the 1,700 example I just gave, which I'm not saying that can work in all situations, but yeah, I'd love to see that reduced because I think it can work. And then I forget what numbers you put for like setbacks in the MU.
They're
6 feet from the side of the rear.
6 feet. Yeah, so taking it from 10 and then the combined number.
Yeah, so then that
just
ends up
straight up
being
6.
2 buildings would have to be 12 feet from each other, essentially, on different lots. So in that district, that seems out of character to what exists now. And apparently we, besides maybe the upkeep of the buildings there, we seem to kind of cherish that neighborhood.
In the mixed use?
At least in the historic districts, which are both, or at least mine's mixed use. Some of it is. Okay.
Oh, I'm
It's
thinking
not- it's
like
not a
mixed
perfect
use
alignment.
along Canal Street and stuff. It's bigger. Than
Those are spaced out. Okay, I was thinking of Horton Homestead, but my Clark Canal from Estabrook Lawrence Streets. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if decreasing setbacks to the distances that you can often see in those neighborhoods would then be prudent to have some more review with that, and I don't know what that would look like, but I just see it in action right now, and it's been that way for 170 years, and people seem to like living there. And I don't know, just general anecdotes, but I don't know. I'd be up for these numbers decreasing the setbacks and the lot size. Maybe just to to match what exists.
So assumably in these neighborhoods, there are buildings with no setbacks. There are actually probably some buildings that are built on their neighbor's property. That's not atypical in a historic compact area like that. I'm pretty sure if we went looking, we would find one. So that is the real question for you as to whether you want to have a side setback requirement. I think, we went from 10. The combined piece I know was one of the challenges for you. For most new construction, unless something extra is done from a building code perspective, if it's going to be multi-unit housing, they're going to need to be 20 feet apart, unless you do something more about fire code requirements. So you're kind of got a trade-off between getting the buildings closer together and the level of construction that you have to do to meet code. Now that in Vermont doesn't tend to kick in until you get to a multi-unit building, but that there is, you did ask whether there were some national requirements, and there kind of are through building code.
That's what I was going to chime in and say. There's also fire considerations.
Right.
And so just making sure that we are accommodating that, even if it isn't required, if it's prudent to do for the sake of well-being and life safety, I think it makes sense. But in terms of setbacks, there are so many places where the setbacks are minimal and they're really walkable, enjoyable places to be. But we certainly don't want to create a situation where, you know, fire trucks or the ladder to get the paint on the house or whatever is not possible. I think making those choices based on what's practical and safe rather than necessarily some arbitrary number seems like a good way to go.
Yes, Steve.
I guess food for thought for the commissioners, and I hope I'm close enough to wherever the mic is that I'm audible. Maybe it's worth considering, you know, being that we know that the life safety and building code requirements do get reviewed at the state level, to allow our code to be flexible, given that it seems that you were saying, Brandy, that there are some trade-offs you can make to get closer to that. If we were to allow development to get closer, given that they would need to meet that trade-off to be approved at the state level, there wouldn't necessarily inherently be a risk to life safety at our level. But
yeah. So I would say, Stephen, you're really faint, but I think I caught that. And the approach that I see communities take in more urban settings is to say either the buildings have to be attached or they have to be a reasonable enough distance apart that you can get around each building. So if you want to go to 0 and allow for attached buildings, that's one thing. But the fire safety question of having 2 buildings that are 2 feet apart, and the maintenance problem of having buildings that, you know, the 2 walls are 2 feet apart, so you can't actually get in between them, is the problem. So, you know, you often see side setbacks as 0 or, and then, you know, a number, and that's the reason, is that attached is fine, but something that is so small that you can't get in between is actually not really practicable.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that at least seemingly by statute, the 0 or is something that we can do. I certainly wasn't aware of that. I think that's really the kind of flexibility that lets both forms succeed.
Can I ask, what is the downside to having a smaller lot size? You know, Tom was talking about reducing it from 3,600 to something, you know, are we potentially limiting? Is that potentially limiting, or is having that 3,600 number, you know, preventing some good things or preventing some bad things? Like, what's the rationale behind that?
So I think if you were going to start and set up regulations for a place that is undeveloped, and you wanted to lay it out for very compact, small footprint lots, that would be one thing, because you could make the accommodations for where the cars are going to go. You know, you would sort of plan it out ahead of time. Right now, when you go to one of your neighborhoods that, yeah, you might find, you know, the 1,700 square foot lot. But if, you know, you started taking everything around it and making it 1,700 square feet, you might run into some problems, because for instance, you haven't solved the car problem. And at 1,700 square feet, you're not getting the, probably not going to get the cars off the property, at least if you start replicating it over and over and over again. You know, a one-off, you can often be a little more flexible about how that happens. But if you start having a whole bunch of them grouped together, then these issues start to come up. The other thing that we do run into is snow. So you have to think about what has to happen on the lot, right? You need to have the building footprint, you know, so you have to think about what kind of buildings these are going to be, you know, how are they going to sit there? There's the vehicle question, which can't be entirely eliminated. There's going to be, you know, a certain number of vehicles that have to be accommodated in these neighborhoods for some time into the future. And we have the snow storage question, right? That becomes an issue in the winter that we need to be aware of. And once again, when you have one really tiny lot, it's not a problem. But if you have a whole group of them, then these issues start to become more important. And, you know, there's the rest of the things that happen on the property. Is there green space, you know, outside space for the residents on the property to have access to? How much green space should they have access to? Are they going to want to have access to? Is there public green space accessible to them if they don't have any private green space in this particular area? You know, some very mundane things, the type of stuff we store outside. You know, where do the trash containers go? You know, is there space for bulkier items, whether that's, you know, a bicycle or your winter tires or, you know, your kayak? Like, those are the kind of questions that, you know, as you get to a much more compact lot form, you know, if these things, if you kind of don't go into it planning that out and you're adapting it backwards, you could run into sort of creating a neighbor dispute type situation. And, you know, that's obviously something that the planning department doesn't enjoy. So those are those issues. And then there's sort of just the baseline practical question that you could take that minimum lot size number down. And I don't think you're going to see that many more lots being created in Brattleboro's existing neighborhoods. And the reason is that generally the way the lots are set up, you might be able to do that backlot thing that we looked at in the infill housing. But in most cases, the existing building is sort of centered in the lot. And so the ability to readily subdivide, even if you had the more acreage, is often not, it's not that straightforward. So in some ways, it's largely what you've got. So what we're getting by lowering the minimum lot size is reducing nonconformity. I don't think we're getting much actual potential for creation of new lots. I think, you know, it will be a rare occurrence, the creation of a new lot.
I guess if there is the opportunity to have 5 more new lots that happen to be that small, like, why would we want to limit that? You know, I feel like at this point, every unit counts. So, you know, just, I understand the potential downsides you were talking about, but, you know, if it's not going to be a common size anyways, you know, what's the harm in allowing it where it makes sense? Sue, we can't hear you if you're...
Okay. Sorry. I think
there you all are.
Glad you didn't hear me because I attempted to interrupt you. So I apologize. I think, you know, well, we might not be creating new lots. We are still creating, you know, the potential for some new housing opportunities through the missing middle infill, and then allowing footprint lots through there so there can be different ownership options.
To Sarah's point, though, I feel like in taking a longer view of the change that we might get to see with these different regulations, if we do feel that smaller lot sizes are something that's not a risk to allow, then we will eventually see buildings, you know, become obsolete and fall down, or, you know, be struck by lightning, et cetera. There will be change in the built environment. Not every building lasts forever. We have a certain stock of 1800s homes that are upkept, but how many of our 60s homes do we think might be upkept for 200 years? We see change a lot. So it's there is certainly the opportunity for consolidating land as change does happen. We could see a developer decide to purchase several adjacent properties and merge them for the ability to transform that into a smaller subdivision through packaging, I think is the term that I've heard. But so there are opportunities where those lot lines aren't completely cast in or set in stone forever. And I do think it's worth pointing out as well that a 20 by 40, 800-foot house with 5 foot all around is 1,500 square feet.
Mhm.
So I think, two of those next to each other are going to be 10 feet apart from one another. It's not as small as it sounds, but it's a little bit bigger than a footprint lot. Just again, food for thought, not to sway the conversation one way or another.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think to your point, zoning, a lot of our zoning was, made many decades ago, and, we're sort of living with the consequences. And so to your point, Steve, like being a little more forward thinking about, yes, maybe like where are we going to put the vehicle, but ideally in 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to be a little more different minded as far as the transportation thing goes. So allowing for those possibilities, is just something to think about.
Well, Brandy, I don't know if you want a tally or to hear from maybe Prudence or something about setbacks and footprint, or if you just want those general thoughts we just shared, but where we could move on.
So we've heard from two of you that you'd like to see the proposed new district go down to lower numbers, so a smaller lot size, and possibly something that would allow for. Did you like the 0 or approach? Practically, I don't see going below 6 feet if you are actually going to separate the buildings. Just in terms of people being able to, while standing on their own property, kind of circumnavigate around their building with a ladder. But you could go with the 0 or approach.
Yeah, Prudence?
Can you just remind me, so what our current bylaw has for lot size and then proposal, Brandy?
So the currently adopted residential neighborhood district has a 6,000 square foot minimum lot size. That's probably smaller than the lots that have been created in the, sort of post-war years. So from the 1950s on, those lots are bigger than that. The lots that were created before then are typically smaller than that. So this was an effort to kind of to split this district in two, essentially, and capture a lot more of the older neighborhoods closer to downtown, and then give them a set of dimensional standards that was closer to their actual built form historically.
So 6,000 is current, and you were proposing 3,600?
Mm-hmm.
One of these things, the things too, is that we can always, absolutely no disrespect meant, but we can move these numbers around after you deliver the product to us, right? Before it becomes the zoning amendment. But when it's something that we weren't aware of, like the 0 or 6 thing, then that's maybe will be good to have on the document kind of fleshed out for us. But as far as individual numbers where we're just asking our preferences, we can just talk about that later, outside of Randy's work, right?
Sure.
But then
I'm
we're
not
just.
saying, I mean, if anyone has
I-
comments or wants to talk more about it now, I'm just saying it's already
I
7.
mean, the other
So-
thing I would say is that you have to think about, a fairly progressive planning commission sitting around making these decisions. We do need to take this public, and do we feel like through the outreach that we've done,
Oh.
that there is enough support? So that's just something to keep in mind. So sure, Brandy can deliver us the product. We are going to have to go about getting them adopted and get public feedback. So yeah, they might change, but just also understand that that is a big change from what our residential.
Oh, absolutely.
neighborhoods, what our regulations say, maybe not necessarily what's on the ground. So we
Yeah,
just are going to
Yeah.
have to. Be
Oh, no, and it
prepared,
is
so.
valuable to hear Brandy's, perspective and context about, people holding ladders and, and how
Yeah.
far off they need to be from the house. So,
No load from
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
the roof, dropping on
Absolutely.
somebody else's property.
All right. Thought I had. Prudence.
So
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather not rehash this again and take more commission time. I'd rather that we kind of land on something if we can. But I guess I would be uncomfortable with, putting the lot sizes quite that small. In terms of creating something that people are gonna want to live in and are gonna work well with neighborhood relations and so on.
yeah. The one other thing I would bring back up so that you're thinking through this procedurally a little bit. So in order to move your NDA application forward, you do need to do the zoning amendment. So there are timing concerns around that, I think, Sue, to some extent. So I think the goal is to try to get a package done here in January that you're ready to advance forward. So if there are unresolved issues, we should be highlighting those and talking through them, obviously tonight and then again at the next meeting.
Which is also hard because we have 3 members not here tonight.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
here tonight. So, maybe what we should do is this was good to get this sense of it. We can come back to that question. I'm also interested here as we move forward. We've kind of been talking between 2 and 3, and was to get some response to the boundary of where that break would occur between the 2 residential, to create 2 residential zones, and whether you think that further adjustments there in one way or the other. I think Sue raises a really good point that there's policy-wise what you want to do and politically what's possible. And so you're also facing those questions as well. And so you want to make sure you can get a package that has gone through, and the community and the neighborhoods. There so far the things that you have done, the Planning Commission has put forward to advance and promote housing creation have been fairly well received, I think. But I think that remains a potential concern that you could hear some of that from neighborhoods that don't want to see much change happen in their neighborhood.
We will certainly hear that about Winston Prouty becoming mixed use. I've already heard it from several people. Not that specific thing, but if 500 units are going to be put there. But it's mostly a traffic issue on Maple Street.
Or is it a traffic issue? Since
Oh,
we do
oh,
the
the-
traffic studies.
The,
I mean,
the,
I think
the worry of
perception
for
is,
the
I've
perception
heard it
is
as
what I
well.
meant.
There's no factual basis to that worry, but it is a worry I've heard.
Right.
But I think it's also worth considering that what we did last summer, or summer 21,
22.
21
Oh.
that we did. So that's
Oh, yeah.
What we did then is in many ways a far more radical change theoretically, and we didn't get
Oh, townwide, you mean?
any pushback. Yeah, theoretically up zones
Right.
by an incredibly large proportion over what was allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So, in residential density, at least by the use,
Gotcha.
We made a substantial change and it wasn't
Mhm.
confronted by the public. So with the correct messaging, I don't think that it's, I would think that the commission should make the choice that it feels is the best planning practice, that it,
Sure.
entrust staff to, stick up for that and take.
Well, and planning commissioners, just to go one.
Well,
Mhm.
sure,
All right, let's move on.
Okay, so so thinking about the boundary, you should have been able to get through and sort of see the online map. There's still evolution happening to those boundaries as we work on both the NDA boundary and some other background housekeeping items too. That boundary is still likely to be evolving before you see it one more time in January. But any feedback you guys have on those adjustments?
Yeah, I have one.
Is helpful. Yeah.
You said in one of the numbers in the memo that some of the rural business district, district lots were
Mhm.
changed to residential neighborhood.
Mhm.
What was the thinking there?
So the rural business, which is up in West Brattleboro, and I don't have that map up to pop it up on my screen, but I could get to it if we need to. There's land, particularly on what would be the south side of Route 9, that's either is residential and is in the rural business district, or is largely undeveloped and could be developed residentially. Perhaps, given current market demand, there's more demand for the residential anyway than there is for more of the commercial type space that's there in the rural business district now. So the idea was to take the stuff that's residential out of the
Sure.
rural business district and move it over to the residential. So there you
I
go.
spent
Sue,
a
if
little
you
bit
could-
of time looking at that this afternoon. So its parcel's kind of on this side. If you
Yeah.
can see my little cursor, it's in here.
Mhm.
And then there's a couple down here as well.
I'm not sure they will be able to see it.
Oh,
Share the window.
I did share it. Can you see the screen at home, Sarah and
Yes.
Prudence?
Mhm.
Okay. So just to the left of this boundary on the south side of Marlborough Road, these were changed. And then a little bit down here as well.
But the rural business district does allow all forms of housing. It's just some of them are conditional. They just need review by the DRB.
The minimum lot size is also a lot larger.
Mhm.
And
So-
the infill overlay that we just created wouldn't cover the rural business district because the way we've got it structured right now, it doesn't cover the rural districts.
What's the reason that we would be going from rural business here to residential rather than making it mixed use?
Well, it's land that already is residential in many ways. So I didn't take anything that had a business on it and move it into the residential district. So it didn't create any nonconformities. I think this is an interesting area of Brattleboro in terms of its function and growth. There's a fair amount of floodplain up in here too. So the areas that are commercial are actually much more flood prone as well. So the areas that are residential are not as significantly impacted by the flood zone, which is good. So I think it makes for a better quality residential setting to actually put it into the residential zone. The mix of businesses that's there now, most of them are fairly transportation focused and perhaps not necessarily the best residential neighbors. So if you were really to sort of intermix it more tightly.
It's a funny district and it's got a funny history and the name has always been challenging. And, you know, it really is kind of a center for lots of neighborhoods in that area because the way it's evolved. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge.
I would just like not to, you know, and I'm not saying that removing a few parcels from having business potential does this, but just kind of dilute the ability of people to stay there as far as getting their needs, you know, and having enough businesses and services and supplies and maybe a grocery store. And kind of in line with how I noticed a few months ago, we talked about, and I guess unofficially agreed to allow bars in that district. So that way, you know, maybe, you know, that's not the only way people can socialize, but it's one way. And then they wouldn't necessarily have to drive or rely on the non-existent nighttime buses to get downtown. Because there, you know, there is a decent density of people right there on either side of that district. So
yeah, I mean, the one thing to think about is that, you know, I think Stu mentioned this in an email, so I'm going to go ahead and say it, Stu, is that maybe the rural business isn't the right zone for this area any longer. You know, I can tell you that, you know, 10 years ago, or now more than that, when it was initially conceived of, the reason it's a rural business is kind of around trying to capture a certain type of building form and design, right? To try to pick up aspects of so it didn't become kind of just a franchise architecture location, right? To try to keep some rural character in the building forms there, which several of the businesses have presently. So that is where the idea of the rural business district came from. And it is a bit of a weird duck.
I think Tom's point about, you know, wanting to preserve, you know, the businesses and still allow residential development, I think, you know, it is like, is it not the rural business and it becomes mixed use or maybe even neighborhood center.
right.
The mixed use as it currently is has some interesting stipulations on the floor size of or the floor area size of the mixed use, like I think 3,000 square foot retail sort of restrictions. And I think given that was tailored to the specific area that we did designate mixed use, it might be more appropriate to look at the other center.
Neighborhoods, service center.
Neighborhood.
It's a neighborhood center. Yep.
Whatever is fitting.
Yep.
But I think it's a great point that this is the RN as it exists is a place where there's not really any kind of commercial potential. And I think that, you know, there have been discussions on accessory commercial units and such to try to address that, but it would be kind of a major down zoning of any other potential, like you said.
Yeah. And although we just have two designated, you know, compact centers by the state's consideration, you know, the downtown and the village center, this is another little center.
Yeah.
It's not the neighborhood center district, but it's the layman's. It's a neighborhood with a commercial center. So we could, you know, improve that or guide it.
It would seem like an important equity conversation too, to be sure that there is still potential for shopping and daily needs met in a walkable shed to the folks that live in Westgate is affordable housing, and you know, it's I think officially by the Census Bureau a low-income census tract because of a lot of other developments in the area that are predominantly low income.
I think I would just say I'd be loath to make more things strictly residential. We know we need more housing, but I think keeping options open and concentrating the density of services in areas that already have close proximity to housing and making this area have a little bit more gravity, or more that ability to draw people to it. I live relatively close to this, and I almost never do my shopping here. And it'd be nice if there was a little more there.
Prudence.
I don't think the zoning's going to probably make more there though, because I lived in that neighborhood near there for a long time. There was an IGA for a while and it couldn't make it, and
Wow.
so I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's just that I don't know. It hasn't ever taken off, as a commercial district. But there's some new stuff now. I mean, I think there's that grocery store still there, right? The deli that's got.
No,
No.
Did it
that
close?
closed.
Okay,
It did
so there's a
close.
dollar store, there's gas stations, there's a Dunkin' Donuts.
I wouldn't downplay zoning over time, though. Actually, at next week's DRB meeting, there's a sketch plan discussion about 70 units in this area.
Mhm.
So, if you get more massive people, then maybe the commercial businesses.
Can you
become
point
more
to the
viable.
parcel?
It's this one here.
Which would be,
There's Westbrook Apartments are already here, and it would kind of,
Which would be
Yeah,
easier
right.
if we made it RN or better for them than
No.
RB?
no.
This has no effect on their plan.
This,
DRN would not.
the
Okay.
RN would make it more difficult. The present RB, it's fairly doable.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Interesting. Thanks for the historical insight about this area, Prudence. And I think too, it is really interesting to think about the long time frame, of what has been and what we want to have. It also occurs to me that for people coming into Brattleboro from this direction, if there were things that they could access in the way of services without necessarily having to come all the way into town, there's pluses and minuses to that as well.
Yeah, it's true. And if there's more, if there's going to be more residents in the area, then that could support more successful businesses, which would be great.
Brittany, if we could look at
Okay.
the residential neighborhood areas down by Cotton Mill or the high school and South Main Street. First, what was the thinking with converting the town-owned DPW parcels from, I think, institutional to residential
The-
neighborhood?
The
Are
idea
they
is
going
to
to be
get
able to
them
keep
in.
doing what they want? Are they
So they could continue doing what they're doing without a problem.
right?
The
But if they
idea
want to put
was
up a
to
new
get them
salt shed at some
into
point.
the NDA. They need to be in they can't be in the institutional zone if they're going to be in the NDA. And I don't know, Stu, if you want to speak to this, but my sense is from the conversation we had is that given that they are municipally owned, if the DPW use was to cease, then you would have them as an opportunity for a potential infill housing location. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be a nice infill housing location.
Mhm.
I think Tom's question, though, is worth thinking about, if they were to rebuild there. I mean, the use can continue. Are we going to be putting, any
Well,
barriers?
we should
to
go look
redevelopment?
back at
But
how
I don't
we
think
dealt
that's
with
not
the
the idea.
community service section in the regs, but I suspect that as a government entity, you can get around any issues that might come up.
Is it possible to change the institutional zone standards to meet the NDA, or is the definitionally, is that not possible by the NDA?
My understanding from when we took the other one and conversations I've had is, I think it's the purpose of the institutional district, and that doesn't really meet what they're looking for.
Brandy,
Yeah,
I'm
and
a little.
because
Go ahead.
I was going to say, because the institutional district covers some fairly diverse areas of town, the requirements that the NDA would have that we would have to put into that whole district would be problematic for other areas of town. So it wouldn't make sense to apply the things that need to be in there for the NDA qualification or eligibility to that district. So yeah,
And on South Main Street, not necessarily the viewable section of it, but between there and downtown, there was some history of stores and bars and some other commercial things. So, and that's a lot of residential that yeah, it's not a long walk to Canal Street, but South Main is not a little quaint neighborhood street. It's it looks like kind of a commercial street that just doesn't have any commercial on it. I think mixed use could be considered there or some of there. Whereas, if it's, Pine Street or Clark Ave, that doesn't seem as appropriate there to me. Even though, it could be nice to put a little corner shop there, right actually where the cursor is, let's just say. But I think people much more feel like that's a calm, quiet neighborhood setting than they would with South Main. Despite the east side being cemeteries. You can't get quieter than that.
We actually do.
You also don't get complaints from the residents.
On South Main, we do allow some small 2,500
and only
square foot shops.
Yeah.
Didn't we talk about accessory commercial units?
Yeah.
Where's
Well,
that?
we haven't really had the conversation because it keeps getting
Pushed up.
we keep
yeah.
running out of time, but
Gotcha.
yeah, that was a discussion. But I mean, it's and one of the questions in the memo is are there other zoning district changes? So
Yeah. So now that that at least I have interest in that, Brandy, and I think I heard some mm-hms and head nods. Maybe that can mix with your expertise, and you might find some rationale for some spots along there or something along that line of thinking.
We can look at that. Other zoning map.
I would just say that the color coding part of me likes the idea of maybe seeing a little more continuity in some of these splotches of color. So for instance, the area we were zoomed in just a moment ago at Canal Street with mixed use, is there a particular reason that we wouldn't let all of that area that's in the middle there in that little, center of the donut to be mixed use too, and let happen what needs to happen there? And continuing along Canal Street too. I mean, what's there right now may not be that. And I certainly understand and appreciate, Brandy, your interest in not creating non-conforming uses, but it does seem to me like along some of these key roads, having mixed use be the option, and then it can be residential or it can be commercial, rather than necessarily having to say, oh, well, now we allow accessory commercial. We can make it mixed use, and then it can be, can be either one. It just seems like there are some places where making the swath a little wider for mixed use, as far as I can tell, wouldn't hurt anything. So I'm just going to put in.
I would say that that's a direction the rest of the Planning Commission is interested in. What you should actually do is sort of look along these street frontages and sort of decide which streets. I think that's the rational way to do it. It was somewhat done that way before. You can obviously see the mixed use captures sort of the historic industrial stuff that's left in that part of town, and then also some of the existing commercial pieces. But it didn't, when it was done, the intent was to not encourage further commercial conversion, I guess. It was to preserve the residential that existed. So if you guys have a different set of policy objectives, I would say go along those swaths. That internal piece is a different zoning district because those are lots accessed from another street. So that's basically what you're seeing, is that this is a sort of decision that was made along the street frontages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
Yep.
I had just a question, mostly to gauge interest from commissioners and also to hear any input that Brandy has. Both on the other side of the mixed use district that we can actually see on the north side of Brattleboro downtown. So the commons,
Mhm.
you know, there is definitely some non-conformities, like one that I live in, over there. And so, you know, maybe there's potential in making that, if not also the mixed use, then perhaps the 3600 or, you know, zero or whatever it ends up being. And as well as the brief second spot that I was wondering about, and I think I know the answer, is that it's outside the scope of what we're doing because it's not NDA eligible. But there is a part of, I think it's Old Guilford, is that the name of, or, yeah, there's
Yeah,
a
Old Guilford.
triangular piece of rural residential that is
Nope.
accessed by water and sewer.
I ran that by the state. Nope.
Not asking about the NDA,
Okay.
but changing it to be some non-rural district because it is serviced. I don't know if that's in the scope of what we're doing or not,
It's
but
this in here.
yeah, I think that's worth maybe looking into.
Right in here. Well, not Mercury. Mercury is industrial, but this kind of area in here, across from the Vabec, the Familari Fields.
Yeah, and in historical zoning, it was not considered rural. So that change was made fairly recently. I'm not sure if it was done intentionally.
Planning Commission.
You're asking for
Little guidance for Brandy, I think.
about this specific topic that Steve brought up, or
About
Either-
this
Oh.
section.
either of those sections, if there's an interest from the commission to see them rezoned.
and what's shown there is what it currently is in our existing, or it's already
Yeah.
been.
It's
This
currently
is-
rural residential.
And it
It-
does have.
Water and sewer is in the road.
Yeah.
Or you say extendable.
And the other spot was the peninsula.
Hmm.
I don't have a strong thought on this one, but I do think it makes sense. The other one, we were talking about that area. Certainly there are a lot of people who are back and forth that way. I think it makes sense for it to be mixed as well.
It's like, it's not a quiet neighborhood.
Hmm.
No,
Yeah, I agree with that second part. It seems like it could be appropriate to have services.
mhm.
Here, I mean, I understand it's water and sewer, but it does have a kind of rural vibe to it when you're over there. But,
So this one, I guess, not to belabor the point, there are probably fewer lots that conform to the acreage than there are ones that don't, because of, you know, that sort of piecemeal. It's 1.5 acres minimum here, and it would have a residential density cap. Whereas if it was, and so it seems maybe not great practice to have it be strictly limited by density when it does have water sewer.
mhm.
So that's the subdivision that we can see down in the bottom left. Or a few subdivisions, I think, small lot subdivisions, but Fort Dummer Heights might count. Those all were permitted under previous zoning
Mm.
ordinances that allowed for smaller lot sizes.
I see.
The road infrastructure is not great there. I would say that it's not necessarily walkable. So just another thing to think about if you're interested in changing that, you know, maybe it doesn't go all the way. Maybe it takes some of the undeveloped.
Yeah, for the most part, all of our other residential, just looking at, you know, the existing map seems to really, you know, kind of be pretty close to other developed areas. I mean, I understand industrial's right there, but it's like up and over a mountain. Except what is that one where the is it the Montessori school? That's quite a peninsula of, you know, the residential neighborhood that sticks out into the rural area. I don't know exactly what my thinking is. I mean, what's Guilford like on the other side of that? not of what you're zooming in, but what Steve brought up down.
Oh, it's-
So there's the
It
state park,
goes into the
obviously,
state
but
park.
Oh, it fronted through the state
The
park.
sewer
Yeah.
line does go into Guilford for the highway rest stop.
Right. And the institutional is a farm, or at least it feels like
Yeah,
a
it is a
farm.
farm.
Mhm.
It's a
Yeah.
educational,
Right.
agricultural education.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I hear that there's opportunity there, but it seems kind of rural to me.
So just keeping my eye somewhat on the clock, I know you do have other agenda items as well. I think this is some direction to keep going on this. I think over the course of the next 2 weeks or so, if you have more thoughts that you want to share on the boundaries, feel free to go in and use the online map. It may evolve a little bit. Like I said, Sue and I and Stephen are actually using it as a tool to. I change things, they look at it. I change things, they look at it. So it is a work in progress type of situation. So, but feel free to go in and look at it, and if you have feedback, direct it through, and it'll get to me so we can keep moving this forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I hope we all do that. I plan to.
We
Okay.
talked a lot,
Yeah.
Brandy. I just wanted to, do you feel like you've got some direction? I think, looking at maybe dropping the lot size and the setbacks.
Yeah, and maybe we can set up another working meeting to sort of hash through some of the boundary questions.
Yep.
Based on some discussion tonight. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll see you again next month.
Brandy.
Yes, you will. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Brandy.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, let's get right into the the non-housing proposed changes in our land use regulations language. We'll start with the first one on the list about about the fence and wall provision, section 316.h. And I brought this up a couple times, kind of very generally at meetings. And Sue was so kind to draft some waiver language. So we'll start with that. Sue.
Yes, so we don't currently allow fences or non-retaining walls to exceed 4 feet in the front setback line. Typically with fences, they can be on the property line at 6 feet, but if it's in the front, it can't be at the full 6 feet. It can be, if you want it in the front setback area, it has to be maximum of 4 feet. That's pretty standard around the country. It's in part to kind of have a public realm, right? And then there's also safety concerns, particularly if it's a corner lot. So I think, we had a letter from somebody that, wanted more of a waiver to that. So I provided kind of a waiver to this standard. It's not necessarily a dimensional standard, so I just kind of kept it in section 316 and created a new H, where if, there's kind of special criteria where they could seek a waiver if they had, unique physical characteristics or something else that, was compelling them to have a greater than 6 foot fence or greater than a 4 foot fence in the front setback. So, some kind of unique physical characteristic or other circumstance, it could be noise, that it's not going to be an inconvenience or hazard to abutters, vehicles, or pedestrians. There's no other alternatives to provide an equivalent level of benefit, and that landscaping and screening minimize adverse visual impacts to public roads or neighboring properties. So that's what I was proposing for waiver language to just, if somebody wanted a fence higher.
Mm-hmm.
they could ask for that.
And so my initial interest with the fence wall, section 316, certainly as you see, you know, there's multiple parts more than just the front yard setback, 316C. You know, there's things about materials at the very end. So potentially this general waiver could apply to that as well, you know. But my main focus, and any of the other things, but my main focus is that, well, I put together a little visual presentation. So I'll try to go through that quickly, and that will explain at least my main take on it. But maybe other people would look at the, you know, section 316 and say, hey, I think this area is more likely in need of waivers, you know, or will be more popular from the town residents to seek waivers from. So I don't know, but this is kind of what pinged me for it. So what I have in these photos is mainly existing fences that we have. And so I don't want to talk about whether, you know, when these were built and if they were built after our existing regs and if they, you know, conform or not and what was done. But yeah, exactly. I know.
Matters.
I know. Well, I mean, enforcement isn't our deal unless we're going to talk about the enforcement section.
Fences were built under old regulations.
Yeah, certainly. But I think the point that I'll try to make will still get across in this, you know, I'm not sure where. So this is the residential neighborhood district. There's a 15-foot minimum front setback. So that means with our current fence, the fence can't be over 4 feet within that first 15 feet. I don't know what's going on the right there. I don't know if the property line is all the way to the end of the green, you know, next to the road, but that, you know, there's 2 front yards here is my understanding, because there's 2 frontages. And if you can see, you know, closely the one facing Putney Road, I mean, that's only several feet off of the sidewalk and the road. And it's hard to tell a little bit with the camera on the tripod on the Google car, the height, but that's a 6 or 7 foot fence. That's, it's 4 foot?
It was 6. This one got cut down.
Oh.
This was an enforcement action. This is a 4-footer. It might be a little bit generous. But it is.
Well, darn. I should have ran this presentation by you guys before I put it on in the.
I didn't know if you had measured. I'm like,
No.
you know, I think it's potentially a little bit more than 4 foot, but this was.
On the enforcement question, I just want to put it on the record that enforcement is almost exclusively complaint driven from the public. So, you know, we don't have a ton of capacity. So if we get a formal complaint, it will be investigated. Theoretically, if this is still above the 4 feet and somebody submitted a formal complaint, that has a process to be fixed.
So anywho, although that may be 4 feet, I still feel like looking at it, like as long as the fence isn't blocking like turning traffic and viewing for safety of turning, I personally totally understand why they would want a fence above 4 feet, because they have this front yard, there's busy traffic, they want some privacy in their yard. And as long as the fence is, you know, has some aesthetic compromises for the public interest, that's my take. So if we can go to the next one, oh, right there, actually, the house next to it shows that I measured from the front, you know, the edge of the sidewalk to the property, then that's about 30 feet. It shows it later down, but you can just trust me. Yeah. And so if they wanted a 6 to 8 foot fence, they'd have to bisect their front yard in half under our current regs. So
You mean this direction?
in line with the frontage.
Yeah, so they'd have to come.
So I measured perpendicular.
Yep.
So, and you know, that's inconvenient to do. You divide your front yard in half. And then there's this property. You know, you could say it's your choice to build a pool or not, but anyway, they have one, and I understand why someone would want. Now, in that case, that is definitely over 4 feet, right?
It's 2012 is before.
Yeah.
Right?
So and so it's before the current regs. So, but still, I understand and I empathize why someone would want that for their pool. Maybe they have children or they're sunbathing, and you know, it's not a front porch, you know, facing a sidewalk where we want to, you know, think about you know, walkable, you know, friendly neighborhood meet and greet. It's just their back recreation area. And
That's the rear though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do we know if this is rear?
oh, I thought it was considered frontage because it's on a road. It's not the front of the house, but
Also, don't pools need to be visually blocked for safety?
They definitely need a fence. Yeah.
Insurance though, right?
It might not-
Yeah, it's insurance. I don't know how that would come in if
Yeah.
somebody, had a, yeah. I don't. I mean, it's hard to say, Tom, because this was before.
Hard to
I'm
say
not
what, if that's
familiar.
a front setback or the height you're saying.
Right, it looks like it would have two fronts, it looks to me. Yeah.
You can go down to see the parcel map aerial view farther down. No, I mean, just keep going. There we go. Oh, I guess it is, right? 'Cause
It's
they're-
one front along, yeah.
Okay.
The road makes a bend,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
line is, the red to the white dot is 15 feet. So, if they wanted, it would really diminish their property size if they wanted to still have a pool and put it behind a 6-foot or taller fence. So continuing down,
But they could put a fence in, not quite the 15 with a waiver.
right. So that's why I'm glad we're talking about a waiver. Exactly. So this is in the rural residential district along, Highway 30, West River Road. And there, the front setback isn't 15 feet, it's 40 feet.
Oh.
So you can see, same thing would apply. And you can see a lot of those homes are exactly, what did it say? They're
That's right.
exactly, they're exactly 40 feet from the road. So now you go down looking at the houses, and I didn't, the street view didn't capture any of the traffic here. But personally, if I lived there, it would be inconvenient to put a gate across your driveway that you have to open every time. And, I'm not promoting walled communities, but I actually lived farther up on that road for a year when I landed here renting. And working in the garden with the landowner, we couldn't hear each other sometimes. So it's an issue of, is a berm a whole lot better for blocking the sound than a wood slat fence? Yes. And who's actually going to do a massive berm? And we're not talking about berms here, but still, it would block some sounds. It would add some privacy and make their property probably more livable for them. I mean, maybe they like seeing the river across the road. And so some people wouldn't do it, or some people don't care about the traffic noise. But it seems reasonable to me to, in a case like that, where the road is just so, just random people driving by at high speed with loud noises, that you can have some ability more than a 4-foot high fence to make your property more livable for yourself, if that's what you prefer. So I think I just have two more examples. This one, if people have issues with the current fence and wall regs, often, kind of the not loophole, but allowance is that, hey, you can do whatever type of landscaping or hedging you want. So, which looks really nice, at least when the leaves are out in the summer, right? Because that's a deciduous shrub, I believe. But, in limited properties, those take up, it depends on the shrub and the height and the size, but 6 feet wide, 8 feet wide. So they take up some real estate. And although that one looks like the landscapers really know what they're doing, sometimes deer eat them and they take a long time to grow in, and some of them die, and the conifers grow even slower, and deciduous doesn't have leaves more than half the year. So all things to kind of consider. And I mean, the fact that that's put up shows that the people want some privacy, and you can see aerially that they kind of have some, little utopia garden going on in there. And then this last one shows a small parcel right on West River Road, and the house is so close to the road, like some of the other ones are. And then, going
This
there,
is
it shows their tiny
Western Ave.
Western Ave. Yeah, it shows their tiny strip of yard. And if they were to put a privacy fence up, to our current regs, it would bisect that 30-foot deep-ish yard in half. And that would just kind of be a silly thing to do. But it looks like they did put up a tall fence, but they put it up very close to the property line, like is sensical. And that's what the waiver would potentially allow if the DRB was to allow it. So giving those examples of, what exists in town, I think they're reasonable and they make sense. And I think there should be a pathway to allowing for them. And I think instead of just outright allowing it in all cases, which maybe we could talk about as well, I think the waiver is a good step or a good resting place.
Do we have a waiver application that people fill out for a variety of things, or how would somebody submit for
Yeah, right. We do have a waiver application because this would have its own criteria. We'd probably need to, similar to like our shoreline or riparian buffer, there's a waiver in there that's got some criteria. So we might have to, put together.
There'd be a
new form, but
modification. Right?
yeah.
Okay.
I do think it's probably worth contextualizing that while I wasn't here when this was adopted, so this is a presumption about what the intended impact of the setback, allowing for a taller fence outside of the front yard setback is that for appropriate large lots in less built up areas where the homes are set back much farther from the street, that it's not doing the same thing to reject the streetscape in an urban environment that isn't preferred, or at least when by the planning commission and the public that adopted that particular set of regs. So I think that if it doesn't feel appropriate to have the 6-foot fence 15 feet in some of these tighter contexts, that's because it shouldn't, at least according to the logic that it was adopted under. And so, I mean, for some of these too, there's homes from the 1800s that don't have a fence, and they've had this particular set of regs for 7.5 years. And so, I don't think that's the only variable that stops them.
Thoughts, commissioners?
I think we should move forward with the proposed waiver language and see what happens with it.
There was one, Prudence.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. It almost sounds like a vote, but one thing I thought too, I kind of just brought this up with random people in the intervening month or two. Some people mentioned, my dad actually was like, well, what about aesthetics, and maintenance and upkeep? Should there be something added there to kind of put the public more at ease? Like if a fence, the backside of a fence is facing the public realm versus the front face. Maybe some language should be in there for that. Like there's that one along Putney Road, next to the substation. It's like, here's this big fence, and apparently some people, don't like that it's taking away from the public realm, but then the private owners go so far as to put the backside facing the public realm as well. Maybe this is another element of that compromise we can talk about.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, we don't have it codified, but that's definitely the practice that we tell people.
Yeah. Because there is something about materials, right? Like no barbed wire and razor wire. And that's because, we're trying to have this compromise between the public interest and private rights.
So you're suggesting it for the waiver, to add it to the waiver, that it'd be a requirement, or just?
Oh, I don't know, maybe just to the section in general that, and maybe there's odd fences where you can't really tell which side is the back and which is the front, and both sides are ugly or both sides are attractive. I don't know. But if there is a obvious backside, it shall face the private side and the front side shall face the public realm.
I was just curious too, this last line of the 316G.
Yeah.
Was this just cut off? Was there kind of a typo at the end here?
Oh,
Right.
it could have cut off because I cut and paste or something. I'd
Okay.
have to check that.
I think it's like of inflicting harm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, actually, I can check it right here, but yes.
Okay.
Scoot over.
So while we're fixing it, let's make sure that gets back in there.
Yeah, I probably cut and paste from a PDF and
Sure.
got dropped or something.
It seems we did have that intent to have minimal, but some level of aesthetic control. So it would seem like that piece would fit great, possibly within the G subsection.
There is more to it. It says a fence or wall must not be constructed of barbed wire, razor wire, or similar materials capable of inflicting significant physical injury unless required by state or federal regulation.
Okay.
Like a prison.
Okay, should should we have a motion on this semi-official decision? Which we're actually gonna, no?
If you want to, you can. I don't think you
Oh, okay.
need to. I mean.
So we all feel in favor of moving this forward and, okay, great. Glad I put in the work to make.
Yeah.
What I thought actually clear. The gas station signage, that should be a quick one maybe.
Yeah, so we in our continuing trials with our signage, which is usually never ending.
Right.
We realized that we didn't really have a good accommodation for fuel price signage. So I'm just really trying to find one for that one. Stack of files. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so there's an overall signage allotment for the sign for the gas station. It might be the mobile sign or whatever, and then there's like usually a fuel pricing sign, which is like got several of the electronic prices there, and we didn't have any allotment for that. So this would allow a freestanding sign per road frontage. Well, it currently allows that, but we're saying it will not count towards the regular sign allowed. Sorry, I'm kind of fumbling through this.
And
We'd allow a 12 square foot sign, and it's not going to account towards the regular mobile sign or text or whatever it is.
and the convenience store sign too.
Correct. And you can also have a fuel pricing sign on top of each pump at 3 square feet. So it's pretty standard in gas station signage. I think I have a couple of examples if you want to see. Brian had done some work similar to Tom had done on the signs.
Well, why is this coming up? Like what caused this to be?
There's a couple of gas stations that have changed hands on Canal Street.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is why it's come up. And I don't have the examples in here, so yeah, I'd have to go find them. But if there's any discomfort, Brian kind of did an analysis of some of the gas station signs along Canal Street and Putney Road to kind of show why we needed to have an extra sign to deal with the pricing, because the way the gas stations handle it.
And this isn't allowing a change of anything. It's just allowing what currently exists.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in section 2 that ends with the word either, it's not saying either A or B, right?
What are you saying? In addition to the signs of good catch. No, that should be stricken. So we want to say they can have both. They can have a freestanding price sign for road frontage, and they can have one pricing sign on each pump.
Okay.
That was my intent. That might not be what you want.
Well, yeah, it was a little ambiguous because the first sentence of the original letter, lowercase a, has that or word in it. So then if the first sentence of lowercase b also had an or in it, then it would fit grammatically, I think. But yeah, so both A and B.
Yeah, A and B is the intent.
Would be allowed.
Yeah.
I don't know if this falls sort of in this topic of discussion, but I will say one of the gas stations on Canal has, signage literally right on the road, which actually blocks you from seeing traffic when you're trying to pull out. I would see that falling under the freestanding sign. I think it has pricing on it, but I've just always noticed trying to pull out of there, you really have to get your nose into the road, in order to be able to see. So I don't know if there's anything regulation.
Height and setbacks are in another section.
Well, they're in this section.
Oh,
It's
319.
for the district, so a freestanding sign, I'm assuming, are you talking about one near Washington Street? Or,
No,
Okay.
next to House of Pizza.
okay.
So between, yeah, next to, where Brattleboro Pharmacy, then House of Pizza, then I think it's a Sunco station.
I refuse to tag the sign section in my regulations. So I have to, it's harder to find. Let's see, that would be neighborhood centers. A freestanding sign right now is 12 square feet, a height of 6 feet in that district. That might be an older sign.
Like it has to
higher.
be off the ground at least 6 feet. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it
Yeah,
lower?
it's like
You have a
sitting on the
lifted
ground.
pickup truck?
Oh, it's sitting on the ground?
Yeah.
It's possible it's a, older non-conforming sign at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any concerns with this section or other questions? If not, we're moving forward with it.
Good to go.
Thumb up. Sneezing elbows, thumb up. Thumb up, me too. Okay. We only have a few minutes left unless we want to extend the meeting. Oh, yeah, everyone's got dates or something scheduled right at 8:10 p.m. or something, huh? Just in time to get them. The energy, I'll just talk aloud
Yes.
for a moment. The energy conservation and renewable energy resources, ERB review criteria, has quite a detailed and worthwhile memo from Steve, I think, to talk about. So that doesn't seem fitting. And then the ACUs, another one by Steve's pen, I believe. And yeah, there's a lot of questions in that to ask us for guidance.
Can I ask
Yep.
on the ACU? I mean, I would love a reaction if you've read the green zoning stuff, but if you want to do that in January, that's fine too.
Yep.
On the ACU, I wonder if our conversation about finding ways to increase the mixed use changes the need for accessory commercial. If we feel like we got it right, then do we even need the accessory commercial?
There was a point that Tom brought up about a spot that would be neat to see a little store, but otherwise it's residential. I think that would still be kind of the intended.
Oh, right.
But that was South Main.
No, but then I was saying, but there is this big RN block between Canal and
Oh, yes.
and if we were in New Orleans, there would
Right,
be
yeah,
a little corner
exactly.
store right there, and neighbors would all come and congregate there.
There's a lot of them in Keene still,
Oh,
but I'm not
Oh,
sure
yeah,
how
there's exactly.
viable they are.
Right.
What's
yeah.
that?
But other daiquiris.
No,
drive
they're
through.
not. It's ice cream.
Yeah, so I think this is actually better fit to that change, specifically being for the remaining RN 5400 as it would be called.
Mhm.
But that's just my take. It's not definitive in any way.
Before I personally give any sort of answer to Sue's thing, I have a question too. I mean, obviously I can read through this memo myself and maybe make an answer, but Steve and Sue, are there any benefits of ACUs in the residential neighborhood over the commercial uses and how they're allowed as principal uses in the MU district, for example? Is there any advantage we're giving commercial in the RN that commercial doesn't have in the MU? Or in every single way, ACUs in the RN, like given equal or lesser, greater restrictions than in the MU?
Greater, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it in that it's an accessory and it's a set.
Yeah. So like the ACUs will always be a down zoned version of
Yes.
principal commercial in MU.
Yes.
Okay.
And it potentially
That helps me.
avoids a land use conflict in RM.
The way I've been thinking about it a little bit is that whereas there are some zoning districts that allow a higher density of housing, but you could still add an ADU to a lot of different lots. It's a small little place that adds one more unit. There are commercial districts where commercial is mostly what's happening, but the ACU would be that little thing that is commercial in the midst of more housing. So it's kind of the counterpart to an ADU.
Mhm. And it wouldn't have as much impact
Right.
as a principal commercial.
Right.
And maybe someday if the community really loves it, then we would upzone to principal commercial,
You know,
but maybe not.
It potentially could have as much impact as a primary commercial, you know, if you get a
Right.
really thriving, like little coffee bar
That
or
everyone's
something
walking
like
to,
that,
yeah.
that, or a little restaurant that people are walking to
Yeah.
or coming to, it could have as much.
But most likely, since it would be smaller, maybe it would have a smaller seating capacity and most likely, yeah.
And it's not a impossibility to consider what you seem to be raising, which is why not consider a range of primary commercial uses. If that's something that you need to do.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm up for it since this thing exists and it's been done other places, you know, it's more work adding another definition and, you know, to our regs, but also it seems prudent to do something, you know, step by step.
I'm not sentimental about it. You can shut it down. That's your role.
I'm curious because I'm still new here and kind of learning how we do what we do. I know this ACU thing has been shuffled a couple times on the schedule. Do we have any strategies for moving forward besides just putting something on the next agenda?
That seems
We
like
keep
that seems
running
like
out
a
of
question for
time.
me. Yeah. 8 p.m. Speaking of.
I mean, do we do a subcommittee? Does everybody submit comments? Like, how do we
We
move
could do
something
a
forward?
subcommittee. We haven't done that in a while. That actually, we could have a little working group of 3 that could hammer it out. We could do it with the green zoning too.
Mhm.
That's not a bad idea if we can.
Were some of the potential other changes that have been floated for staff driven outside of the Brandy's work, zoning changes, would that also be worth considering adding to that, or since those haven't been? I guess being that it's 8:00,
Yeah.
action can't be taken.
Yeah.
I mean, we can also schedule a second meeting in some months. Anywho, 8 p.m. Have to have our public comment period. All right, here it is, and it's over. No public. Great.
Tom, I'm wondering, can I pick up on that idea
Oh,
of the
sure.
working group? Sorry.
Oh,
and
yeah,
just
yeah.
send out an email and see if there's any interest.
So this would be for a few people to bounce around some of these
The ACU and
land
the-
use
yeah.
reg things to develop a more formal,
Yeah.
semi-formal thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great idea, actually.
We can do that.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's, given the way that it's publicly accessible and put these up, I think it would be probably all right if by open meeting law, if members left comments in the Google function on that saying how they felt about it.
No,
No.
I would rather not
Mm.
edit documents or do that. So that's not good. It just makes it tough for us to do. I know it can be done. It's not.
Yeah, just where it has timestamps and it doesn't change the document. So, but I know
The
that
Secretary of State's office does
Jim
not encourage
Condos
that.
is not,
Mm.
he's scared of Google and Suite, and I understand.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
We do, because we didn't finish our business.
I move that we adjourn and table all further business to a subsequent meeting and or subcommittee.
Sounds great. Is there a second?
Second.
Sarah does second. Okay. You don't need a vote for that. We're adjourned. Good
Happy
night,
holidays,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, yeah, you
Likewise.
too.
Prudence, same to you.
Bye.
Bye.